The Fresh Anointing Show. Today, I don't know if you know this or not, but Black Americans 70 and older, 21.3% stats have shown are living with Alzheimer's. So what I want you to do today is listen in. We have a special guest with us, which I will introduce in a few. But we're going to talk about Black Americans and Alzheimer's. So I want you to stay tuned and learn about how you can support your loved ones with this disease and why it is so prevalent in African Americans. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. It's a fresh word for today on the Fresh Anointing Show with Jay Richardson. Hey, don't forget to tell your family and friends about a fresh word for today on the Fresh Anointing Show that comes your way each week, just to give you some motivation to get up and go. Don't you just sit there. Stay tuned for a fresh word from Jay Richardson on the Fresh Anointing Show. All right, let's go. It's the Fresh Anointing Show with Jay Richardson. Let's see what nuggets Jay has for us today on the Fresh Anointing Show. Let's listen in now with Jay Richardson. The Fresh Anointing Show.
Yo, my man Jay. Come on.
Once again, top of the day to you and welcome to the Fresh Anointing Show. Thanks for joining us on another great day. Hope that you're doing well. Want to make sure that you subscribe to us on YouTube and Facebook. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and also leave your comments in the chat let us know what your thoughts are, what you're thinking. Today, we're going to be talking about Black Americans and Alzheimer's, and we have with us that is going to be sharing some more details and help us to understand and learn some more about Alzheimer's is Doreen Hill Graham. Welcome to the Fresh Anointing Show, Doreen.
Thank you so much, Jay, for having me. I'm excited to be talking about this very important topic.
Well, I'm glad to have you. My mom was, how do you say it? She had Alzheimer's. I'll just say it like that. And so this is a topic that's dear to my heart because it sort of slipped up on us, and we didn't really know that mom had Alzheimer's until one day she had to go to the hospital for something, and she was in the hospital for a few days. And when they were releasing her, they were telling us that she could not go home by herself. She could not stay by herself. Someone always needed to be with her. But before that point, we didn't really know moms had Alzheimer's. It was something that really, we didn't know the signs. We didn't understand the signs. And so that's what I think is so important, is that we understand more about Alzheimer's and some of those signs. And I know we're not going to get into all of that today, but as you introduce this topic to us, and then we will have a follow-up series, a couple more follow-up series to help us to understand more about it. So we really appreciate you coming on the Fresh Anointing Show to talk about especially Alzheimer's in the Black community for Black Americans. So thank you. And we're looking at this right in the midst of Black History Month. So it ties right in. So thank you. It has been said that 35% of African Americans say that they are concerned about Alzheimer's or dementia. And that's a low number when you look at that 35%. And then 65% of Black Americans say that they know somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia. And then there's 55% of Blacks think that significant loss of cognitive abilities or memories is a natural part of aging rather than a disease. So in the midst of our series here that we do, Black Americans and Alzheimer's, hopefully we can cover some cover some of those things to help people understand this disease more in depth than just topical surface type things that we've heard. So first thing, Doreen, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Sure. Well, first, again, thanks for having me. And it was a pleasure when we met back in November and I was able to kind of tell you my story. My mom also had Alzheimer's, and actually, the end of January is 10 years since she passed. And when we were going through our journey, we didn't really know a lot. And my dad was her primary caretaker, and we didn't really reach out for help. And so from that caregiving, it kind of brought me to the point where I actually have my master's in gerontology, and I wanted to learn more about the aging process. And Alzheimer's is very close to my heart. And so I've also become a certified dementia practitioner to learn more. And then I'm giving back by being a community educator volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association. So I'm able to go out and help in the community just to get the word out. I think most people have heard of the Alzheimer's Association. It's a wonderful organization. And we're just trying to educate individuals because Alzheimer's is becoming more prevalent in our world. And part of that is because people are living longer. The other thing is it's a difference between when people think it's just normal aging when you start to have memory issues. So unfortunately, Alzheimer's dementia is a little more cumbersome than that. But I'll be happy to kind of go into that a little bit later to sort of explain, what is Alzheimer's, what is dementia, what are some of the initial signs that you might see. And then I've also got some information to help and some statistics about the Alzheimer's Association, and then some information about the African American community, and then ways we're trying to get individuals involved helping with research, because that's going to be the best way to find a cure for this horrible disease, because it's a disease that not only affects the individual, it definitely affects the family. It's a disease that someone can have. For us, we were fortunate, it was only 5 years, but like President Ronald Reagan had it for 10 years. Anybody can go, they say technically up to like 20 years, and it's a very depending on the situation, a slow disease, and it's almost like each day you're slowly losing that loved one. And it's just something that takes a toll on the family. It obviously takes a toll on the patient. It definitely takes a toll on caregivers. And so we're trying to see what we can do from a research standpoint to find out exactly, how the disease progresses, what's going on. I will be talking more about Alzheimer's, but there's other types of dementia that can be tied in with memory issues. So this is just sort of a overview of Alzheimer's, but hopefully for your audience, it's gonna, if those listening don't know somebody or it hasn't affected you yourselves, hopefully somebody in, your neighbor or coworker, that you can learn some information and we can pass some knowledge on to them.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, as we talked about earlier, my mom, whose picture is on the thumbnail, it was shocking to us that when we heard that she had this disease. And just so happened, I had two nieces that they were CNAs. They were beginning, now they're nurses. So that was, a while ago. The picture on the thumbnail shows you, she was 81 at that time. And I took her out for her 81st birthday and had no clue. My mom had Alzheimer's. She seemed to be doing really, really well, doing fine. We had great conversations together, but A few years later, I think maybe 2 years later, 2, 3 years later, she was gone from here. And so that's why it's dear to my heart as well, because I want people to really, really know more about it and understand it, so it won't catch them off guard. And also just to be there to support their loved ones. So thank you so much again for being a part of the Fresh Anointing Show and sharing with us on this topic. So, Doreen, tell us a little bit more about the Alzheimer's disease.
Sure. Let me first start off. I'm going to just kind of talk about some facts and figures that we have right now. An estimated 6.5 million Americans the age of 65 or older are living with Alzheimer's dementia. And this includes in North Carolina, 180,000 residents. Wow. And we believe that this number is estimated to grow as many as 210,000 by 2025. Part of what happens too is as you age, you can have a greater chance of developing Alzheimer's, and people are living longer. And in 2030, we're going to have the baby boomers reaching 65. So we're going to have the 65 and older population will be there'll be more 65 and older than any of our population. And so there's a greater chance. So a lot of times when you hear statistics going out, it's looking towards the future, and it's scary, knowing that we are going to live longer. Nationally, we've got more than 11 million caregivers of people with Alzheimer's disease or other types of dementia. In North Carolina specifically, 356,000 caregivers provide a total of 514 million hours of unpaid care, valued at a total of $7.3 billion. So this is a disease that's affecting a lot of people. It's affecting families. That are the caregivers taking off of work, trying to figure out what needs to happen, and all of the costs that are associated. And then another statistics we have is 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. And then nearly 2/3 of those with Alzheimer's, 3.9 million, are women. And part of that is typically women tend to outlive men. And so that's why you have 2/3 of the population turn out to be women. For my mom, she actually was diagnosed at 68. So she was sort of on the younger side, but you do have what's called early onset Alzheimer's, and that's for any individual that develops the disease at 65 or earlier. So it kind of depends on when they are diagnosed. Do they fall into that younger early onset category, or are they into the Alzheimer's category? And like I mentioned earlier, fortunately for us, my mom was only sick for 5 years. So when she passed in 2013, she was 73. And it's scary because my maternal grandmother lived 3 weeks shy of 99. Wow. And she didn't have any type of memory issues really till her 90s. And then here her daughter ends up getting it, 25 years earlier. My mom also kind of had, we called it the double whammy, where she had what was called normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is fluid on the brain. And that was causing some issues with her memory, with her communication skills. And so my mom sort of had 2 things working against her. And it sort of like you didn't know for your mom, my mom, the big clue was she got lost on the highway. She would go to have lunch with some girlfriends. She was retired. She had lunch with girlfriends each month. The first time, this is back in 2008, she's not very talkative, and they kind of thought, well, that's really odd for Joanne, but they just kind of put that information in the back of their mind. And then the next month, They noticed too, she wasn't as talkative, and she ended up getting lost. She was living outside of Charlotte, and she got lost on I-77. And she called one of her friends she had lunch with, and she's kind of like, help me. With, she ended up going 77 north towards Statesville instead of going 77 south into South Carolina. And her friends called me and just said, Doreen, something's going on with your mom.
Mm,
And then I asked my dad. He noticed that, she did a lot of QVC shopping. It seemed like every day a lot of packages were coming. He kind of chalked it up to, oh, she likes to shop. But then when he looked into it, it ended up she was not paying the bills. And she was very meticulous about that. She had the legal pad, everything dated, checked, all that. And it ends up, I don't think she ever, I think the mortgage was always paid, but I think like the light bill, the cable bill was missed. So then we ended up going to the like her primary care doctor, going through that. We were sent to a neurologist, who then that May actually did a spinal tap. And there was about a 2 hour period of time where your body replenishes that the spinal fluid, and my mom became more talkative, and it was like, oh wow, we've got Joanne back in a way. And then sure enough, later that day, it was almost like she became mute, which was very, very
mm.
different for my mom.
So, Doreen, when you look at this disease, it has different effects on different people. It's not the same
Correct.
as everybody has the same symptoms. And I know when you and I had talked, I asked a question because we sometimes, for me, I'll just talk about me. When you said dementia and then you said Alzheimer's, I was looking at those as two different diseases, but dementia is the umbrella over Alzheimer's, and it has other
Correct.
diseases
Correct.
listed up
So
under dementia.
yes, a
I
lot of
always
people.
thought Alzheimer's was the big one, it was the
Yes.
umbrella, but it's not. It falls up under dementia.
Yes. So dementia is really, like you said, they use it in the illustrations as an umbrella. It ends up that dementia itself is not a single disease, but it's that umbrella term that would cover a wide range of specific medical conditions. This does include Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is the most common. And then what happens is that the different disorders are grouped under the general term dementia are caused by abnormal brain changes. And it depends on what's going on with those brain changes to determine. It's like the characteristics. Sometimes you hear of like Lewy body dementia. There's like a Parkinson's related dementia. There's frontal temporal lobe dementia, and that's based on it's happening in the frontal temporal lobe. And there's I know I don't have the exact number, but there's over like 100 different types of dementia, and it's based
Wow.
on the different kind of characteristics of what is going on. But
Mm.
Alzheimer's ends up being the most common form. And so a lot of times I almost feel bad for somebody that has like frontal temporal dementia or somebody that has Lewy body dementia, because there's not as much. I don't think people are as familiar with those, but we've heard so much about Alzheimer's, and it can be some too that they could even call it mixed dementia, where they're having characteristics of something. Another big characteristic sometimes people talking about is called sundowning, and that's when you kind of get to that 4 or 5 o'clock, that sometimes the individual can become almost more aggressive in their behaviors. And they realize, research is done, that they're seeing that it's kind of like that time of day that you don't know is how it's like how, because clearly somebody that's in the midst of the disease really doesn't have an idea of what time it is, but it ends up when you get into that late type of the day, sundown, and you can have different, behaviors that are coming. So there's a lot of different pieces that sort of overlap. I think the big thing for Alzheimer's is that it is the most common. It's the one that people have heard the most about. I wonder, my guess is probably, from research, it's probably getting the most funding. But there's, a lot more funding that needs to be done to help. There's a big, there was, I think it was last week, I saw where there was some lobbying going on in Washington with with the federal government and getting more money,
Mm.
that's allocated for some of the Alzheimer's research.
Yeah. One of the things when you just talked about all of those different diseases that falls up under dementia, and you named Parkinson, I never would have known that Parkinson was under that umbrella of dementia, and that's
Well,
why this is so important.
it's a Parkinson's related dementia. So obviously with Parkinson's, that has more, I think most people know of Michael J. Fox. And so you see the individual that, and Muhammad
Mhm.
Ali,
Yeah.
that, with more than thing, but it ends up that some of the memory issues that they're having end up being tied in with the Parkinson's. So they'll
Mm.
make mention to it. It's not to say that somebody because I'm not a doctor by any means,
Right, right.
that somebody with Parkinson's may, develop a dementia that they're referred to as Parkinson's dementia. One other thing that can happen first, so I guess kind of starting at the beginning, is when people sort of start to have, everybody forgets their keys. I think everybody in the world at some point, if you're driving, you misplace your keys. What ends up happening is when you misplace your keys and you're not able to retrace your steps to figure out where are those keys. And then you find them. If you normally come into your home, you have a table by the light, you lay your keys down, and you end up finding them that the keys ended up in the bedroom. Well, with normal aging and normal memory, you can realize, oh yeah, when I came in, this is back in the day when we all had home phones and the phone rang. So you happen to walk in, you heard the phone, you run into the bedroom, you pick up the phone, and it ended up you left your keys on your nightstand. Well,
Mhm.
you're able to figure out when you find the keys, oh, this is how they got there. What happens for somebody that's got, starting to have the memory issues is they have no way of retracing those steps of, I normally put my keys on the entryway table. How did they end up on the bedside table? And then part of the concern ends up too is somebody in the midst of the disease can then start to accuse somebody of stealing,
Mhm.
can
Mhm.
accuse somebody of trying to play games, and all of that type of things. And so some people, when you start to realize there's memory issues going on, a lot of times you'll go to your primary doctor, and some primary doctors just say, oh, it's just normal aging. Well, memory loss is not a normal sign of aging. And so you really need to be able to advocate. I would say that's probably one of the biggest thing is advocate for your loved one. If you've got questions, definitely ask. And if you're not comfortable with, if you go to Dr. Smith and you've used Dr. Smith for years and you're not comfortable, maybe it ends up you got to go talk to Dr. Jones or Dr. Brown or whoever it is, just, as for when your loved one is going through this disease, they're not able to advocate for themselves. And we need to, as family members, be able to advocate for them. And you end up, when you go to the neurologist, well, then they give you the memory test, and they give you the test where they make you draw the clock. And then they say, using the old fashioned hands, put it, at 250. And they've got to be able to do that. And then they'll say like 5 words, and then they'll ask them to repeat the words. And then like 5 minutes later, they ask them the words again. And then they will ask you to start at 100 and go backwards by 7. and keep counting backwards. And then they count like how many times you're able to do that. And then they pick the letter F and say, name a bunch of nouns, but you can't use proper names. And then they're counting and they come up with like this base score. And I know this because I actually too went through with my mother-in-law, who was starting to have some memory issues. Well, in my mother-in-law's case, she ended up getting a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, and it's
Mm,
MCI. And with that, if you have mild cognitive impairment, there is a chance you can develop dementia, but there's also a chance that you can't. But it's sort of like the first diagnosis that would be given. And again, I'm not a doctor, but the first diagnosis that's given that kind of recognizes something is going on with their memory. We didn't see any of that with my mom's. It ends up when we look back, because she had both the Alzheimer's and the normal pressure hydrocephalus, her symptoms were going very, very quickly. And going back to like when she did the spinal tap, what ended up happening is my mom had a shunt put in, and the shunt was put in to help the normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is fluid on the brain, to try to help monitor that.
mm,
And it was a successful surgery because it helped her gait, which has to do with the way people walk. Sometimes you can see people shuffling, and you have the concern when people are shuffling, they have a greater chance of falling.
mhm.
And she was able then to be able to, it's like you need to be able to pick your feet up one step at, left foot, right foot, the Dr. Seuss book, and do that. But when people are having issues with memory, with normal normal pressure hydrocephalus, she was shuffling, and after she got her shunt, her gait was improved. So based on that, they considered it successful, but her memory and conversation didn't improve.
Yeah.
So everyone
So,
has different symptoms.
um, why, let me ask you this and tell me your thoughts. Why is Alzheimer's disease so prevalent in the African American community?
Well,
In African Americans, I should say, not the community, but
correct. Um, I actually reached out to the Alzheimer's Association, and I got some information because that was something that I didn't really know in my studies to get my master's in gerontology. There is some concern with research that the African American community sometimes doesn't want to participate in research. And some of that goes back to the syphilis studies that were done. I believe it was in the 1940s, don't quote me, but it was with the Tuscany Airmen, and they
mm,
were given, some of them, they were given shots that had syphilis. And so there's a lot of distrust with it. And so part of what some of the concern is for like research is trying to get more African Americans to become more involved in research. But one of the questions and I asked the Alzheimer's Association is dementia more common in African Americans, and what are some of the reasons? And these were some of the answers they gave me. It says, while older Black Americans are twice as likely as older whites to have Alzheimer's or another dementia, research hasn't yet identified the cause. It is believed the higher rates of cardiovascular, heart, and blood vessels disease may play a role. Black Americans are at a higher risk in comparison to Caucasian Americans for diabetes, a disease with strong connections to Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, and stroke. And then more than 40% of Black Americans have high blood pressure and are at risk for stroke, which can lead to a greater risk for developing Alzheimer's. Having higher cholesterol increases the risk for stroke and may increase the risk for Alzheimer's. and this one's interesting. In addition, a gene mutation has been identified that nearly doubles African Americans' risk for getting Alzheimer's disease, according to a large study. It's called the ABCA7 gene, and it's involved in producing cholesterols and lipids, suggesting there may be a more important pathway in Alzheimer's disease in Blacks than in whites. However, this gene mutation alone is unlikely to explain the increased risk of Alzheimer's and other dementias in African Americans.
So let's go back. You talked about something that I think is so important, because you mentioned, back in about the Tuskegee situation, where there's a distrust.
Correct.
That's there. So because of that distrust, then it has brought on a distrust. Now in the 21st century, that distrust is still there, because Black Americans feel like, hey, I don't know if I can trust these people. They want to do studies on me, but I'm not sure if I want to go through that, because it didn't work back then. They did all things that they were not supposed to do. And so now here we are with this disease that is a killer disease. If we don't pay attention to it and understand that, just like my mom left here and we didn't really get to know what it was all about until she was already diagnosed with it, and hospice came into play to kind of help us to understand what was going on. We didn't have a clue. We didn't see the signs. We didn't understand the signs, and there were no studies that were done. But again, help me to understand, because I know the Alzheimer's Association, they do studies on people, right?
Yes.
So what and I know I'm asking this question to you, but you may not know the question, or you may not be able to answer the question, but how can Black Americans trust the Alzheimer's Association, or any association that's doing these studies, or organization that's doing these studies, to say, hey, we're for real, we're going to do the right thing, we're not out to get you, or not to use you as a guinea pig per se?
Correct. Well, when I was studying to do my master's, and we were looking into with research, I can't remember the exact, there's a review board, and it's something that starts with an I, and if I was prepared, I'd remember. So now what happens, and it is all because, and that's one thing I had never heard about, this syphilis study. And that was one of the things with doing, with studying for my master's, because we do so much is based on research. So what happens now is, if there is an actual human subject that is involved in research, there is a review board that the researchers have to go and get the approval of what exactly your study is going to be about, what you're trying to figure out, what's the process of what is involved, and then the kind of the follow-up. So the hope is that things are in place, that people can feel more comfortable, more confident. Part of this concerns is, did we hear the story, from grandma, grandpa, that said, oh, you can't trust a doctor, and it's just kind of come down from one generation to the next.
Mm-hmm.
It would definitely be something. If you go on the Alzheimer's Association website, is alz.org. There's information that talks about like clinical trials, and you could end up asking, if somebody is interested in getting in a trial, you can definitely find out the information about what they're doing to ensure that there's not going to be any issues. Let me also give, there's a toll-free number for the Alzheimer's Association that's manned 24/7. The number is 1-800-272-9700. 3900. And they would be able to answer two, questions about that. But I do know that they have learned from the syphilis study, because things were not communicated and people were kept in the dark about what happened. And let's say again, I can't remember the exact date, if it's 1940s, one would hope in 80 years what we've learned from that, and looking to see, um, it's, I don't want to be political. I don't think it has anything to do with you're a Republican or a Democrat. We need to have research to figure these things out. And so, like when we had met back in November, that's part of the research group that was there trying to, explain some of the different studies that are going on. Because what's happening in some of the studies is, if you're, trying to remember what they call it, the base, or your can't think of the word, the population that you're using, you don't necessarily want to have it all, the majority of it be Caucasian. The other part too is you don't want it to be all women versus men. So my challenge to any African American men listening to this is, sign up for a study, because you taking part in this study is going to help, hopefully, our generation, but future generations. And so there's, I think, just the mistrust. But I do know, again, not being a doctor, and I've not conducted any type of research myself, that would definitely be something, for anyone in the medical field, or someone going on for like your PhD, with that. But there is now, a review board in place for anybody who is trying to conduct research, that has to make sure that the, proposal of the study that they're doing has been approved, and knows, and how things will be communicated to those that participate.
Yeah, and I think that's great to have that review board. Also, I would think that that review board would be a diverse review board,
Yes.
because that's another factor that comes into play as well. But we're running out of time, and so I want to, the last question for us today is, what are some of the resources for individuals to learn more about Alzheimer's?
Sure. Well, like I had mentioned before, our website, alz.org, is wonderful. It has a lot of information. It also we are part here, in Raleigh, we are part of the Eastern North Carolina chapter. And you are able to, their support groups, if anybody's going through this as a caregiver, there's support groups for that. You can call the 800 number. Again, that number, 1-800-272-3900. I can also tell you, in North Carolina, there's an organization called the Dementia Alliance of North Carolina. They have information. We're lucky here, in Raleigh, that over at Duke University and Chapel Hill, they are doing research together, and there's the, Duke Family Support Group. So there's a lot. And then another, if anyone has heard, there's a, woman who's a occupational therapist, and her name is Tippa, Teepa. Last name is Snow, Snow. And she has been working in the dementia realm for over 40 years. And she has a lot of great resources. She has developed something that's called Positive Approach to Care. And what it is it's trying to help that loved one who has a dementia. And she has a lot of YouTube videos. The Alzheimer's Association has a lot of videos. So there's definitely, information out there. And, I would love and would be happy as a community educator volunteer. For anyone that's listening, if you have, your church, your place of business, if you're in, I don't know, the Lions Club or any social organization, if you can reach out to Jay, he would get me the information. The Alzheimer's Association, we have several different presentations. We have 10 warning signs. We have understanding Alzheimer's and dementia. We have effective communications. We have understanding dementia behaviors. And we have a presentation that's on early onset. Would be happy if it's not myself, but one of our community educator volunteers could come out and be able to talk. Part of when you and I were talking and why I, agreed to do this is just to try to get the word out. What can we do to help people? Because unfortunately, as we're going to live longer, until we find a cure, Alzheimer's is not going to go away.
Right,
And
right.
it's affected my family. It's affected me. I remember the day when my mom looked at me and asked me, had she met me before? And that was 3.5 years before she died. And I still remember that knife that went through my heart that day. So I don't want anyone else to go through that feeling. So,
Yeah.
but I would start at alz.org, or I'll say it one more time, the 800 number of 1-800-272-3900. And again, that the hotline is 24/7 if anybody has any questions. But if you start on the website, I think that's a really good place to start and has information.
Well, Doreen, I thank you so much for being a part of the Fresh Anointing Show and coming on and sharing this information. For me, I think it's very important that the more we can learn about this disease, it will help us, help our loved ones as well. Family, I want you to know that help is available. If you are, as Doreen just mentioned, if you or your loved one has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, you got to know that you're not alone, that there's help for you. And you have to take the necessary steps, because if I'm remembering, Doreen, these part of some of those diseases that is the umbrella of dementia, it affects the brain.
Yes.
And so we need to make sure we take care of ourselves. That means that we have to eat healthy. We have to have a healthy diet. Make sure we get the proper rest. Make sure we are exercising if you can. I know there are some people that can't exercise, but if you can exercise, alleviate the stress, and that's a big one right there for alleviating stress. And make sure you continue to utilize your brain. Do those. I see a lot of people do the word puzzles and things like that. That's going to keep your brain occupied and moving and learning and continue to manage whatever is going on with you. Don't just wait around and say, I'll be okay. It's just like the newer vehicles now, they have these check engine lights with them. And when that check engine light comes on, that means there's something going on with your engine in your vehicle. And so our body gives us those same signals in helping us to know that there's something wrong. And we need to pay attention to those signs. And so, family, please stay tuned for our next episode of Black Americans and dementia. And once again, Doreen, any closing thoughts that you may want to say to the listeners?
Again, thanks for having me, and hopefully we've made a difference in somebody's life. I think that's the most important, and also to let people know that there is help. It's a very overwhelming disease. And like I said at the beginning, it's a disease that does affect the whole family. It's not just the individual. And so please, reach out to the Alzheimer's Association, alz.org. just so you can feel like, because they always say as a caregiver, you have to take care of yourself as the caregiver in order to be able to take care of your loved one. And so we want to do what we can to make sure and get the word out, but also have resources that we can help the caregiver. So I look forward to our next session. I was just even thinking, maybe we'll talk about like the 10 warning signs, because I feel like we just kind of touched the surface. Next time we can get a little more specific into what some of the warning signs to look for. And then, also to be able to discuss, about different research opportunities that are available, because until they're able to find a cure, and obviously they have to do the research to find the cure, we can, get some of that information out. And hopefully somebody listening to this podcast is going to say, you know what, I'm going to sign up for a trial. I feel like, because I've learned something, I want to help. And we want to be able to touch as many lives as we can.
Well, once again, thank you so much. And family, thank you for joining us. If you know someone that has Alzheimer's, falls up under the umbrella of dementia, please don't ignore it. You're listening to the Fresh Anointing Show with Doreen Graham, and she's laid out some very good points for us. And I hope that you would tune in next time to listen in more, to get some more information. But if you know someone that's going through this now, please share the podcast. Leave us your comments. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube and like us on Facebook. Until next time, may the Lord bless you real good.
The views and opinions expressed by the program participants are not necessarily the views of the Fresh Anointing Show. Thanks for joining us. Keep your head up. And until next time, remember to forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past, because God is doing a new thing, a fresh thing. Can you see it? The Fresh Anointing Show.